silver just quietly told on every dealer at the coin show, and once you hear the numbers, you will understand exactly why some tables cleared out their cases while others sat there untouched for hours. Today we are doing something a little different. Instead of talking theory, instead of talking charts and long-term forecasts, we are walking the floor of an actual coin show, table by table, and pricing out real physical silver the way it is actually being sold right now. In person, cash on the table, no online markup calculator involved. Eagles, maples, generic rounds, poured bars, and 90% junk silver, all priced against the spot number of the day, which was sitting right around $63.50. Every figure you are about to hear was pulled directly from a table on the show floor, rounded slightly for clarity, but close enough that it reflects almost exactly what a buyer would have paid walking up and putting cash down. Before we get into the walkthrough, a quick word from the sponsor that helps make this kind of on-the-ground reporting possible. If you are newer to buying physical gold and silver and the process still feels intimidating, a trusted online bullion retailer can make that first purchase painless with no order minimums, transparent pricing up front, and packaging that protects your privacy. It is the kind of service hundreds of thousands of stackers already rely on, and it is worth checking out if you would rather buy from your couch than a folding table. Now, onto the floor. The very first table we approached had a nice little spread going. Silver Eagles were sitting on display next to a couple of well-known bar brands, the kind of chunky, collectible, poured and minted bars that carry their own following. Those bars were priced at $70 an ounce, a premium that reflects their brand recognition more than the metal itself. The Eagles at that same table, however, were priced far more reasonably at $65, which worked out to only $1.50 over spot. That is an outstanding number for a government-minted coin. And if that had been the only table we visited all day, we would have walked away thinking the show was full of bargains. It did not stay that way for long. The very next table told a different story. Generic silver bars that were going for $70 an ounce, and Eagles had jumped to $74, a noticeably steeper premium than what we had just seen a few feet away. Same show, same day, same spot price, and already a meaningful gap forming between neighboring tables. The third stop only had Eagles available, and the seller had it printed right there on a flyer spot plus 10. Do the math on that, and you land at $73.50 a coin, among the highest premiums we would encounter all day. It is worth pointing out that this dealer was upfront about the markup rather than burying it, which at least gives a buyer the ability to make an informed decision. Even if the number itself was not competitive, a few tables down, the pricing loosened back up. Generic rounds here were going for $65 an ounce, and maples were priced at $65.50, putting the premium at just $2 over spot. There was some uncertainty about whether those particular maples were current year coins or slightly older stock, but a quick comparison against wholesale numbers for current year maple leafs, which typically run somewhere between $2 and $2.50 over spot when purchased by dealers in bulk, showed that this table was actually pricing below wholesale. For a retail buyer standing on a show floor, that is about as good as it gets. The next table turned out to be one of the best stops of the entire day. Rounds were priced at $66.50, while both Eagles and Maples came in at $67.50, translating to premiums of roughly $3 and $4 over spot respectively. Solid numbers on their own, but tucked into a display box on that same table was an even better find, a set of professionally graded and slabbed Eagles priced cheaper than the raw, ungraded coins sitting right next to them. Those slabbed coins were going for $67 each, which comes out to only $3.50 over spot once you account for the graded premium typically attached to slab coins. That is the kind of pricing anomaly that experienced showgoers dream about, a graded coin selling for less markup than its raw counterpart usually commands. In hindsight, walking away from that box without buying several of them was a missed opportunity. And it is a good reminder that when you are deep in the process of documenting a show for other reasons, it is easy to let a genuinely good deal slip past you. Moving along, the next dealer had Eagles only, priced at $66.50, another very reasonable spot, plus 3. Considering what many online retailers were charging for the same coin around that same time, this was a table worth remembering. Then came a dealer running a full printed price sheet for Eagles, sorted by year. The cheapest coins on that list, dated to the mid-1980s, were priced at $75, which works out to roughly $11.50 over spot. As the list moved forward through the years, prices climbed steadily, settling around $77 for most of the middle years before jumping again once the list reached coins from the early 1990s and older, where prices sat at $82 and up. This table made clear that not every dealer prices purely on melt value and current premium. Some lean heavily into date and perceived collectability, even for coins that are still readily available and not particularly scarce. For a buyer who simply wants ounces in hand at a fair price, tables like this are worth walking past. For a buyer chasing specific dates for a collection, the calculus is different. 90% junk silver made its first appearance a few tables later. Old worn circulation coinage, quarters, dimes, and half dollars minted before 1965, priced here at $57.30 an ounce. In face value terms, that worked out to about $6.20 back of the day spot price per dollar of face value. A fairly typical discount for junk silver, which tends to trade a bit below pure bullion products because of the labor involved in counting and verifying worn coinage. The next table dealt purely in generic rounds, and the seller mentioned that some of the more unique or limited designs in his case carried higher prices, but for the standard generic rounds sitting out for sale, the price was flat spot $63.50. Walking away from a show floor having paid spot price for physical silver with zero premium attached is about as good as retail buying gets, and it is worth noting whenever it happens. A nearby table was pricing rounds using a rounding method rather than a fixed premium, essentially rounding the spot price up to the nearest whole dollar. If spot happened to be sitting at $63.70, the rounds went out the door at $64. If spot moved up to $64.20, the price became $65. There was some ambiguity about whether the dealer always rounded up or occasionally rounded down, depending on where spot landed within that dollar range, and that detail was not fully clarified in the moment, so it is worth mentioning as an open question rather than a confirmed fact. That same table also had eagles priced at $67.50, a spot plus 4 premium, along with a selection of house-poured silver bars priced at flat spot $63.50. Those poured bars made in-house by the dealer rather than sourced from a mint were genuinely attractive pieces, and selling them at spot price with zero premium made them one of the more compelling buys of the day. That is another one that, looking back, deserved a purchase on the spot rather than just a photograph. The next table carried a bit of everything. Rounds, bars, eagles, maples, and 90% junk silver all in one case, though the junk silver price from that particular table unfortunately did not get recorded in the moment. Bars and rounds, they were both priced at flat spot. Eagles came in at $66, a modest spot plus $2.50, and maples were priced at $64.30, an even tighter spot plus 80 cents, one of the smallest premiums recorded on maples anywhere on the floor that day. Another table did not have a large selection, but ran a tidy strip of eagles down the center of the display case priced at $67.50, another spot plus 4. Yet another dealer had 90% junk silver priced at $40 per dollar of face value, which translates to about $55.90 an ounce, a notably steeper discount to spot than the earlier junk silver table. In melt terms, that worked out to roughly $7.60 back of spot per ounce, an exceptional price for junk silver by any measure. That same table also had generic rounds priced at $65 a spot plus $1.50. Between the two, the junk silver was the standout, and it is the kind of number that reinforces why some buyers make junk silver their default entry point into the physical market whenever they can find it. Priced this far below melt, the final table in the walkthrough only carried generic rounds priced at spot plus $1. There was also a roll of paper-wrapped rounds, a kind of packaged, uncirculated product that often carries a small collector premium, and the dealer was asking more for those specifically, though the standard loose rounds in the case were priced at that flat $1 premium. That covers every table on the floor that had eagles, maples, rounds, bars, or junk silver for sale. Now let us rank each category from best price to worst, because the spread between the top and bottom of each list tells its own story about how much shopping around at a single show can actually save a buyer, starting with bars. Two separate dealers were pricing generic silver bars at flat spot, the best possible outcome for a buyer. A third came in only slightly higher, around $64. The fourth was noticeably more expensive at $70, though it is worth remembering that particular pricing applied to branded, collectible bar styles rather than plain generic bullion, so it is not entirely an apples-to-apples comparison. Strip that outlier out, and the overall takeaway for bars is straightforward. Expect something close to spot price if you shop around even a little. Eagles told a much bigger story. The best price of the entire show was that very first table at spot plus $1.50. The worst prices from the dealer running the date-sorted list climbed as high as $11.50 over spot for the cheapest available date and well beyond that for older years. Line up all 8 dealers who had eagles for sale from best to worst, and the spread runs from $65 to $75. On a single coin, that is a $10 difference. Buy 10 coins and it becomes a full $100 difference on the same show floor. Sometimes just a short walk apart, not separated by miles or by driving to a different town entirely. If there was ever a case for taking the extra 20 minutes to walk the whole floor before buying anything, this is it. Buyers who grabbed eagles from the highest priced tables when better options were sitting just a few rows away left real money on the table. Plain and simple mammals showed a similarly wide gap. Across the dealers who carried them, the spread ran from the best price to the worst by roughly $9.20 an ounce, essentially mirroring what we saw with eagles. Buying maples from the previous table instead of the cheapest one available on the same floor amounts to the same kind of costly mistake. Rounds were considerably tighter across the board. The best price recorded was $63.50, matched by more than one dealer alongside the table that rounded to the nearest dollar, which landed in a similar range. The highest price for rounds topped out at $66.50. That puts the total spread at only about $3 an ounce, still real money on a larger purchase. 10 ounces at that spread comes out to $30 in savings by choosing the better table, but nowhere near as dramatic as what we saw with minted coins like eagles and maples. Junk silver, despite only 2 dealers carrying it on this particular show floor, showed the tightest spread of any category. $40 per dollar of face value against $41 per dollar, both representing a healthy discount to spot. The difference between the two worked out to about $1.40 an ounce or $14 across a 10-ounce purchase, not nothing but far less painful than the gaps seen elsewhere. So what is the overall takeaway from spending a day pricing out an entire show floor? Table by table, coin by coin. Simply this, coin shows can be an excellent place to find real deals on physical silver, and on this particular day, every single category we tracked, bars, eagles, maples, rounds, and junk silver, had at least one table offering a genuinely strong price. That is a meaningful finding on its own. It was not one lucky table carrying the whole show. Good pricing showed up repeatedly and across categories. At the same time, it is clear that pricing at these events is far from uniform. Some dealers appear content moving a smaller volume of product at a fatter margin, comfortable with the idea that some buyers will pay it and some will not, and either outcome is fine by them. Other dealers are clearly running a higher volume, lower margin approach, moving product quickly, turning that cash into the next batch of inventory, and relying on volume rather than markup to make their numbers work. Neither approach is wrong. It simply means the pricing you encounter at any given table depends heavily on that individual dealer's business model, not on some universal standard for what silver should cost that day. For a buyer walking into a show like this, the lesson is simple but easy to forget in the moment. Take the time to walk the entire floor before committing to a purchase. Do not buy from the very first table you see just because it is convenient or because you are eager to make a purchase. As we saw firsthand, premiums on the exact same product, minted the exact same way, backed by the exact same government or mint, varied by as much as $10 an ounce depending purely on which table you happen to stop at first. That kind of gap adds up fast on anything beyond a single coin purchase. It is also worth remembering that some of the best deals of the day were not the flashiest tables or the biggest displays. They were things like that box of slabbed eagles priced below the raw coin sitting next to it, or the house-poured bars going out the door at flat spot. Those are the kinds of finds that reward patience and a willingness to actually stop, ask questions, and look closely at every case rather than glancing and moving on. There is a reasonable argument that those slabbed eagles alone were worth a much bigger purchase than what actually happened, and that is a lesson worth carrying into the next show. When a genuinely good price presents itself, it is usually worth acting on right then rather than assuming it will still be there after one more lap around the floor, taking a step back from the specific numbers. This kind of table-by-table pricing exercise is a useful reminder of how physical premiums behave differently from paper or spot pricing. Spot price reflects the wholesale exchange-traded value of silver at any given moment, but it says nothing about what an individual buyer will actually pay to walk away with metal in hand. That gap, the premium, is shaped by minting costs, distribution costs, dealer overhead, demand for a particular product, and yes, simple variation in how aggressively any given seller wants to price their inventory on a particular day. Coin shows compress all of that variation into a single room, which is exactly what makes them such a useful place to observe it directly, rather than comparing prices across different websites or different cities. For anyone planning to attend a show for the first time, a few practical habits stood out from this walkthrough. Bring a phone with the current spot price pulled up and refreshed, since premiums are only meaningful relative to where spot sits at that exact moment. Do a full lap of the room before buying anything, taking simple notes or photos of pricing as you go. the same way this walkthrough was assembled. Ask every dealer directly what their premium is over spot, rather than relying only on a sticker price, since some tables, like the one advertising spot plus 10 right on their flyer, are upfront about it, while others require a quick question to clarify. And do not overlook the less flashy items in a display case. Generic rounds, house-poured bars, and junk silver frequently carried the tightest premiums of the entire show. Even though they typically get far less attention than eagles or maples, it is also worth noting how much variation showed up even within a single product type, depending on the year or condition of the coin. The table pricing eagles by date showed a clear pattern. Common, more recent dates priced closer to melt, while older dates crept steadily higher, regardless of whether that scarcity was actually reflected in real market rarity. For a buyer purely interested in ounces of silver rather than building a date set, chasing the cheapest available date rather than paying up for an older year is usually the more cost-effective approach. Unless there is a specific collecting goal driving the purchase, 90% junk silver deserves its own bit of attention here as well, since it was consistently one of the better values across the show. Junk silver, despite the somewhat unflattering name, refers to circulating coinage minted before 1965 that happens to contain 90% silver content, a byproduct of United States coinage policy at the time. Because it trades based on face value multiples rather than a per ounce sticker price, it can be a little more confusing to compare at a glance, but once converted into a per ounce equivalent, both tables offering it on this show floor came in well below spot, making it arguably the single best category for a buyer purely focused on accumulating ounces at the lowest possible cost, assuming a dealer with junk silver can actually be found on a given show floor. Since it was noticeably less common than eagles, maples, rounds, or bars, put all of it together, and the picture that emerges from a full day spent pricing an entire show floor is this. Coin shows remain a legitimate and often underrated venue for buying physical silver at competitive prices, sometimes even below what online dealers or wholesale numbers would suggest. But the range of pricing within a single room on the exact same day for the exact same spot price can be enormous, particularly on minted coins like eagles and maples, where the gap between the best and worst table reached into double digits per ounce. Rounds and junk silver, by contrast, tended to trade in a much tighter band, making them a relatively safer category to buy without extensive comparison shopping. Though comparing is never a bad idea regardless of category, the single biggest takeaway, if there is only room for one, is that walking the floor before buying is not a wasted 20 minutes. It is very likely the most valuable 20 minutes a buyer can spend at any show. The dealer sitting closest to the entrance is not necessarily the dealer with the best price, and on this particular day, the data backed that up clearly and repeatedly. That wraps up the full breakdown from this show floor. Every table, every category, best price to worst, side by side. Hopefully this gives a clearer, more grounded picture of what real-world silver premiums actually look like away from online listings and toward the kind of in-person negotiation that still defines a huge portion of the physical bullion market. Stacks